apple pie is kind of just such a classic. Gotta start off with a good apple pie. Some might argue for chocolate. There was one person that was pretty staunchly saying that they wanted chocolate pie. That's true. We're gonna need 2 1/4 cup flour. The flour mixture that you use matters a lot because it has different protein strength to it, different absorption for how much water it might need. I'm going to be using, for most of the things we're making today, Bob's Red Mill 1-to-1 baking flour. It's certified gluten-free. At Celiac Kitchen, I love cooking a lot. Gluten-free definitely doesn't mean that you can't have all your comfort foods, but we're just home cooks who are really passionate about delicious food. 1 teaspoon of xanthan, 1 tablespoon of sugar. Next we're going to do a little bit of salt here, 1½ teaspoons. Just give a quick mix to our dry ingredients. The next part is going to be the butter. My butter has been in the freezer. The colder the better. So we're actually going to be shredding our frozen butter. You want your pie crust to stay as cold as possible. So the flakiness comes from bubbles of the fat covered with the flour and steam rising, and it makes levels and flakiness in a crust. So the cooler you can keep things like this up until the point of baking, just like your puff pastries, the better. Because if it melts at all, then you're actually gonna lose some of that wonderful flakiness because it's just gonna mix in with it entirely and you won't get bubbles and steam that rise. Flaky butter, you gotta have the butter. Everything is better with butter. That is a fact. And we're aiming for about 165 grams total, which is about 1 stick and 3.6 tablespoons. Move aside shredded cheese. I have a new 2 a.m. shirt. Yep, you know what? That is perfect embracing the fair attitude. We're just gonna have frozen shredded butter as our 2 a.m. snack. I love that idea. So, this is kind of what it looks like. Bowl. We're going to take a second from that and get our next step ready. It's going to be our wet ingredient. So we're going to start off with 1 egg. You also see different ratios for pie crust. 3:2 to 1 is a common one. 3 parts flour, 2 parts butter, 1 part wet ingredients. But with most gluten-free product, kind of need a little bit more of that liquid to help it maintain a good structure. They tend to run a little crumbly or dry. You've probably experienced, so more liquid is better. You don't want to go too crazy. 1/4 cup of water, which is about 60 milliliters if you're going with metric. We're going to add 1 tablespoon of distilled vinegar. Acid is also helpful in a lot of gluten-free dishes. It tends to help the flours actually pull in the moisture better. Do I see pigs being sure? We always use our little piggy spatulas. They're so cute. They were a gift from my mom. Mix my wet ingredients. I'm actually going to put these in the freezer for a minute or 2. We want them as cold as possible as well to keep up with how cold our butter was. So we're going to mix this in a little more. You guys can see. We are going to slowly add in our wets to our dry for our pie crust here. We want it to be mainly butter and flour. So we're just going to drip it in slowly. And it should come together. It'll take it a minute. It might be a little shaggy, but it should come together. Call that pretty much done. So we're going to put this in cling film and then put it in the fridge to rest at least a ½ an hour. The reason here isn't because we have any kind of gluten or anything we need to let rest or worry about toughening up. It's actually hydration again. We want it to absorb fully as much of that little bit of liquid we put in as possible. Since our kettle went off, we can move on to our sweet iced tea. So in your upper corner you'll see that's where that pot is. We are going to put in a pinch of baking soda. I tried to look up before what hard numbers people think a pinch actually is, and I couldn't find a specific agreement. It's one of those baking terms, like when you ask your mom for a recipe and she's like, enough. Just use enough until it looks right. And then we're going to add in 2 cups of boiling water, 6 tea bags. We're making the concentrate here. But we're going to let that tea steep for about 15 minutes. We're going to work on preparing our filling so that when we roll out our pie dough, we're ready to go. My oven is already preheating at 375. We start with about 7 apples, but our goal is going to be about 6 cups. So there's also lots of debate on types of apple. Pink Lady is what I went for, but I do hear my alarm going off for our sweet tea. The next step, because I want to have some iced tea to sip on while I do this, I'm going to add about 3/4 a cup sugar to our concentrate. Sweet iced tea for a reason. That feels pretty dissolved to me. And then we're gonna add in just plain water. There's 4. We're going to add about a cup of ice cubes per serving. Sweet iced tea, highly recommend. Sweet iced tea reward for chopping all the apples. I'm just gonna make the other part of the filling now, and then we'll roll out our pie shell. It's not a true custard, it's just a creamy filling. So we got 3/4 cup sugar. Next we're gonna want our flour again. We're gonna do about 3 tablespoons. So we want about a half teaspoon of salt. Nutmeg and cinnamon to preference. So here we have our dry ingredients. I'm just mixing together generally so don't get giant clumps of flour. Add 1/4 cup cream. We want this to be liquidy enough that we'll be able to pour it over the apple filling. Actually, it's just a hair thick for me, so I'm gonna add a little more cream. Alright, that's a little more runny, easily enough that I could pour it when we get everything filled. I'm going to prep the pie pan. I always just use Crisco. There's different kinds of things you can use. Most recipes actually just use flour underneath. I actually have found with gluten-free baking it's quite sticky, but I really like cornstarch. I find that it works really well for how sticky most gluten-free pastries and bread doughs and things are. You always want to get your pie dough rolled out to at least inch and a half past what you're going to be baking in. That should be a nice excessive amount of cornstarch, which is what we want. The old Farmer's Almanac kind of rule is 2/4 is about how thick you want to roll out your pie crust. So our pie crust is chilled, and then I actually took it out to let it a little bit more closer to room temp, but still chilled so that it's workable. If it's too cold, it might be really hard to work with. You probably won't need the whole thing for the bottom. We'll start with maybe 2/3 of it. We're going to dust everything with a little bit of this cornstarch. I'm going to re-spread around all my cornstarch because, like I said, you don't want to put all this hard work into a pie crust and then have it just disintegrate on you. I want to be able to get this off and get it onto our pie pan. I actually like to keep a ruler in my kitchen, the plastic one, so it's easy to wash. So one trick that you can do is to kind of gently roll it up onto your rolling pin and then kind of roll it out across. We added extra xanthan gum to this, so it should be relatively for us to get it shaped. This is our general apple pattern that we went with. It's an apple flower. Yeah, it kind of looks like one. This was our custard filling mix that we made earlier. We're going to pour that in and let it start to settle. Perfect, so that is going to settle in and bake down. I have about a 9-inch pan, so I'm going to go for somewhere between 11 to 12 inches rolled out. We're going to do the trick again with the rolling pin, just to help reduce heartbreak and tears. Your pie crust should always feel chilly. We're just going to trim the edges, crimp, and then put steam bubbles in the top. I crimped it around the edges. I am just going to cut Celiac Kitchen into the top of the pie for our steam bubbles. For my egg wash, we're going to use 1 egg and 1 tablespoon of milk. While you're baking the pie, do you think we can have a Waddy can? So for those who missed it earlier, Waddy is Dr. Watson. He is our cat. He is our HR department. He's very bad at his job. He likes to just get cuddles and snacks and he screams at us, but he's a wonderful cat. I would love to do a Waddy cam. I can't really move the cameras in our current setup because it took us too long to get it perfect. Tin foil under the pan. Yes, so what I'm actually going to be doing is I have parchment paper on a cookie sheet that's already hot in the oven, so the heat from the cookie sheet will help cook the bottom, hopefully prevent some of that soggy bottom you can get. And the parchment sheet is to hopefully reduce if there's spills. I won't cry as much trying to clean it. The tin foil, that's another good idea. I am going to put tin foil on top so it doesn't brown too much while it's cooking, because this pie does take a minute to cook. So I've got my preheated cookie tray here, you guys can see in the corner with the parchment paper. If you're just getting into baking and don't use parchment paper, it is a godsend. I highly recommend it. It makes everything so much easier to clean up and do. Alright, so I'm putting this in on the bottom of the oven, the bottom layer, so that we get as much heat on the bottom of that pie as possible. So here's our aluminum foil. We're just going to tent it over it gently to prevent burning. It bakes for about an hour.